Following my recent playthrough of Final Fantasy VI, I found myself thinking more and more about the overall themes and the characters, and I found myself appreciating them more and more. Final Fantasy VI is well regarded for having a great plot and fantastic characters, but I often don't see people go into depth about what the themes of the story actually are. So today, we will be analyzing the themes of Final Fantasy VI. One of the things I find myself really appreciating about this game, and franchise as a whole, as I get older, is the fact that it respects your intelligence. An example of this would be the ongoing debate on who the protagonist of Final Fantasy VI actually is. We all know the game features an ensemble cast of several characters, but many of them are more prominent in the plot than others. Chief among them are Celestia and Terra Brantford, who are generally considered to be the protagonists of the game. And it is those two characters, I feel, who most well represent Final Fantasy VI's themes. Now, my personal view is that Terra is the overarching protagonist. The game begins and ends with her character arc, but that by no means diminishes the value and contributions of the other characters, particularly Celes. In fact, I would argue Celes is the strong secondary protagonist. It is these two characters, I feel, who most strongly encompass Final Fantasy VI's overarching themes. Terra's core conflict of being a girl enslaved by the Empire in order to push their machinations forward contrasts pretty heavily with Celes's role of being an Imperial general for that same Empire. In a lot of ways, Celes is Terra's foil. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the game respects your intelligence, so it doesn't really emphasize this aspect of their characterizations at all. The fact that they have quite a lot in common. The characters are the only two in the game that can use magic naturally. They both have very strong ties to the Empire, and the characters undergo a radical transformation after an encounter with a young man named Locke. Locke's role in the story really cannot be understated. He is one of the few characters, aside from Terra and Celes, who gets a lot of story focus and involvement in the overarching plot. His character is instrumental to the development of both Terra and Celes. In a lot of ways, he is the emotional heart of the story. It's Locke who makes Terra realize that it is unnatural for her not to have any real emotions or attachments to other people, and it is Locke who wins over Celes's heart and makes her a more generous, kind-hearted person. Locke is the trigger that sets these character arcs in motion. I feel like among fans, it's very easy to write off characters like Locke because it feels as if they can be relegated to a mere love interest role who have no real bearing on the overarching plot or characters. In fact, I imagine that if Locke were a girl and like all the genders were reversed, that people would be very critical of him for this reason. That his entire character seems to revolve around his interactions with women. But, as we all know, Locke is an extremely well-rounded, compelling character with an interesting background and a dynamic with other characters. In fact, it's interesting to note that he meets Terra before Celes. Celes incorrectly assumes that Locke is in love with her upon rescuing her in South Figaro. But as she learns more about him, as she learns about his involvement with rescuing Terra and his background with the love of his life, Rachel, her feelings start to change. She starts off very aloof and cold towards him, but over time slowly starts to fall in love with him. In fact, towards the end of the game, it's Locke who has to reciprocate her feelings towards him by overcoming his lingering feelings for his beloved Rachel. In my opinion, it's this dynamic that is the core of Final Fantasy VI's overarching themes. The idea, the importance of giving and receiving love. It is my belief that Terra and Celes represent these themes. Terra represents the importance of showing love and appreciation to other people, while Celes represents the need to be loved in return. And it is these two characters, these two ideas, that are two sides of the same coin, as it were. It is these two characters that are the driving force behind the story. The love that these two characters exhibit towards other people is in stark contrast to Kefka's sheer contempt and disdain for other people that essentially amounts to nothing. The love that Terra and Celes exhibit is complex, it's nuanced, it's deep. There's a lot going on there. But with Kefka, everything he does is inherently shallow and pointless. At the end of the game, when the heroes beat Kefka, you see immediately what their efforts amount to. You see the birth of a new child. You see the world at peace. You see, without having to be told, that Kefka was completely and utterly wrong. Terra and Celes' worldviews and experiences were completely different, but in the end, they came together and did something spectacular anyway. They became very close friends. Whatever problems they might have had with themselves or with each other or with other people, all of that was overcome out of sheer love. And that to me is a kind of a spectacular thing. Now, I would like to take a moment to explain to you the certain situations these characters get into that emphasize these themes. I want to talk about the situations that make Terra and Celes emphasize these qualities in which we have discussed thus far. And to do that, we are going to go through their entire storylines one at a time. As Terra is the protagonist, we are going to start with her. Terra begins the game as the mysterious waif, a girl that has mystical powers with no real understanding of where they came from or what she is. And, perhaps most importantly for the character, she has no idea what she should do with them. But because of the love and support of the people around her, people like Locke, people like Banon, even people like Shadow, Terra learns to use and harness these powers for good. And this results in the end of her character arc, in which Terra, who has spent the entirety of the game being mentored by other people about the importance of love, in turn, going full circle. Terra begins to show love to other people, to children. She learns to be a mother figure. She understands the importance of giving love to other people, and it becomes her reason for fighting. In contrast, the other characters see Celes as a bit of a potential threat. They see her as someone who has very much potential to betray them. Celes is seen as someone who had much more agency when it comes to her involvement with the Gastalian Empire. She never wore the slave crown. She was never forced to do what she did, but she was a highly successful and well-regarded general regardless. She conquered South Figaro, which, in all honesty, makes her the most successful out of the three Gastalian generals. For whatever reason, Celes has a morality crisis after conquering the city and decides to betray the Empire. Her stated reason for this is that she's aware that Kefka is planning to use poison against Doma, but Celes is aware that Kefka is up to no good and has decided to take a stand against the Empire, has decided that the Empire doesn't deserve her support, and so she decides to not take part in it anymore. She decides to abstain herself. All of this before she meets any of the other characters, by the way. This is something she did completely on her own. She had complete agency. But because of the circumstances of when and why she decided to do this, the characters aren't entirely sure whether they can trust her. The only person who shows her the absolute trust and respect is Locke. And that is primarily motivated by Locke's history with Rachel, his obsessive compulsive need to be supportive of women. There comes a point in the game where Kefka, in a desperate bid to create division within the party, declares Celes to be a traitor, which of course Celes denies, but there is a very real possibility of that being true. Even Locke isn't sure whether or not he should have faith in her, but Celes assures him that she has their best interests at heart, and she does everything she can to hold off Kefka while the rest of the party escape. But because of the awkwardness of the situation, because this situation was never really resolved, Locke and Celes are never the same after that. When they meet up again in World of Balance, when they are proceeding with their Esper search, the entire circumstance is awkward. It's stilted. Like, neither of them know how to proceed with their relationship going forward. Locke is still hung up on his feelings about Rachel, but Celes is beginning to realize that she deeply loves Locke and cares about him very much. This all comes to a head, however, when the world ends and the entire group are separated from one another. Celes has to awaken in a post-apocalyptic hellscape where seemingly everything she knows and loves is gone. Locke is no longer there. They've lost. All she has is Sid for company, and if you don't play your cards right, he dies too. If this happens, Celes, overcome with despair, decides to throw herself off the cliff, and that leads into one of the most essential moments in the entire game. The thing that really encompasses the entire theme of World of Ruin, of overcoming overwhelming despair with love. She realizes that Locke could still be out there, and that if she kills herself, that she will never have the possibility of seeing him ever again. And so, Celes sets out on her quest, assembling the allies and going out to defeat Kefka. In a lot of ways, you could argue that Celes is the protagonist of World of Ruin, whereas like Terra is the protagonist of the game as a whole, because the World of Ruin, the entire concept revolves around Celes. She is the character you start off with. Her role and her involvement and her character arc that comes to a conclusion at that scene on the cliffs is a defining aspect of what makes the World of Ruin what it is. The idea that you should never give up hope, not only for yourself, but for all of those that you love. Because Celes never gave up hope, she was able to reconnect with Sabin, with Edgar, with Terra, and they went on to defeat Kefka and save the world. None of which would have been possible if she had given up like she originally intended. The game doesn't make mention of this at all, but I think it's well worth pointing out that the character who addresses the possibility of Terra ceasing to exist after defeating the Warring Triad and Kefka because of the disappearance of the Espers and the source of magic in the world is Celes. Celes, in a lot of ways, throughout the entire game, has grown very attached to Terra. They are very good friends by the end of it. And it's something the game doesn't put a lot of focus on. It's really odd, especially when you compare it to something like Final Fantasy VII that goes to great pains to emphasize what great friends Tifa and Aeris and the rest of the cast are. Like in 6, a lot of this aspect is really downplayed, but when you look at that ending cinematic and you see Celes express concern for Terra, and Terra go on ahead with the operation to destroy Kefka anyway, seeing how willing she is to sacrifice herself for others, like, you do get a strong sense of just how strong-willed these women are and how much they're willing to do to protect those they care about. And it's this, I think, that makes Terra and Celes some of the strongest female video game characters I think I've experienced ever. They have such complex plots. They have such satisfying resolutions. They're proactive. They they can struggle sometimes. The characters, both Terra and Celes, balance that tightrope between being endearing while still being extremely competent, amazing characters. The game never feels like it's pushing a girl power narrative or that these characters are not capable of overcoming their own circumstances. The game is not afraid to say that love is a very important thing in all of our lives. I feel like most modern female video game characters are afraid of getting put into serious, committed relationships out of the fear that it would take away their agency and make them lesser characters. But we see with Terra and Celes that those kind of relationships is what makes us all human. Celes falls in love with someone that she really deeply cares about, and Terra discovers her own value as a human being in caring for others, caring for a group of children that had no one else to look up to. Too often, I hear modern women try to say that being independent means that you shouldn't care about other people, that you shouldn't do anything for other people, that you shouldn't be there for other people, that it means that you need to be entirely on your own all the time, right? You need to be completely independent. That's what that means to them. But Final Fantasy VI shows us all that that's not true. It is very important to love and be loved.